One factor that a lot of questions have come up, Google questions, of course, but a lot of questions come up about how is this going to affect me, my professional life? And if I have certifications of sorts, what should I expect with a DUI if
the
and
first,
when?
I mean, as we kind of touched on this earlier, the first thing is potential for losing your license. As I said, we almost all rely on our ability to drive legally to and from work, right? I mean, even in folks that are working at home, you go to meetings, you have to go into the office periodically. You got to meet with clients, vendors, whatever the case may be. So that's number one, is your ability to drive is at stake in many of these cases, in virtually all of them. And so that's number one. And then as far as, every job is different. We get this question often is, what my background? Well, it's hard to answer that. Every job, obviously the higher you go up in society, the more thorough the background check. And so whatever somebody's particular jobs or policies, that certainly could impact your employment with whatever, business or agency you work with. And so, and then, of course, you have professional licensing and things like that, nurses, the people, attorneys, doctors. We all have a professional licensing board to oversee our status. And so in most of those professions, it has in many of them, they have mandatory reporting if you've ever been arrested, and then obviously the annual background check. So all those things, I mean, that's why it's not simply a traffic ticket or a traffic stop.
And I would say there's two big things to note here, which is one, a common misnomer is people don't realize that, one, you have 4 records. You have a driving record, you have an arrest record, you have a criminal record, and you have DFS, CPS, Child Protective Services, Department of Family Services. When you're hiring a criminal defense lawyer, you are hiring them to protect your criminal record and then hopefully do a good enough job to where you can go back and get that arrest record expunged. But the second you're fingerprinted, it's in the system, and it doesn't matter how much money you have or who you hire, there's going to be an arrest record. What I often tell people on first offense DWIs is this is not a life ruiner, this is not a career ruiner. When I get the question of, do I tell my employer, and of course this is always very specific, but more often than not, I tell them if you think it's going to come up, you ought to address it head on, because like we talked about earlier, all walks of life get them. People understand one night of poor judgment more so than they understand a liar or someone who's kind of lying by omission.
Sure.
Now, those are first offense DWIs. You start racking them up, it's a whole different conversation. But I typically say, and I've had friends of all walks of life get DWIs. I mean, there's successful lawyers who've had DWIs. There's judges, doctors. I mean, so again, they're not typically, a first offense is almost never a career or life ruiner. Would you agree, Steve?
Yeah. If it's handled appropriately.
Yes, of course. With that caveat.
Can they spiral? Yes.
Sure.
If you handle it appropriately, have the right person in your corner, I 100% agree with that. Even in the most difficult of professions, we've become a pretty forgiving society. With what Chris said, I absolutely agree with. Can somebody forgive a lapse in judgment, a poor decision to get behind a wheel? Now if there's an accident involved and injuries, that's a whole different ballgame. But a standard run-of-the-mill first offense DWI, you address it head on. Many times an employer might put you in with their employee assistant program or get some alcohol treatment and vet those things out. But I absolutely agree. We've become a more forgiving. It's not, it's a little different than other crimes in the sense of, crimes of, moral turpitude or burglar. I mean, those things are a different ballgame. But I agree with that. We can generally get you out of this. You're going to jump through some hurdles. This is kind of what I always tell clients. It could be the classes. It could be community service. But we can in most cases, virtually all first offense, we can get you to the other side of this fairly unscathed. I mean, it's going to cost you some money, and you're going to have to do these things, but I can't recall somebody saying, hey, I lost my job.
No. In my entire career, and I've represented almost every profession, except I have not represented a judge yet. But I've represented, any other, high-end profession you can name. I can think of one instance, and it was someone who wanted to work for Anheuser-Busch, and they have a no-tolerance policy. But he ended up becoming an investment banker and is doing quite well. So, and he's registered with the SEC and has all those licenses, federal licenses. So didn't stop him from that. But that's that is literally the only time. He kind of had a dream that he wanted to be a brewer and start his own brewery, and he wanted to start there to get experience. But, that's the only time I could ever think of someone's, and he didn't have a job and lose it. He just wanted to work there, and that was disqualified him.
Sure.
But
well,
again,
it's good to know. It's good to know on an ethics standpoint. That's not something they should spend a lot of time worrying about, especially on a first offense.
And I know that's easier said than done. I always say, once you hire us, let us do the lifting, heavy lifting. Let us. You kind of turned it over to us.
Becomes our problem.
It's on our plate. Let us handle it. I know it's easier said than done. It's not like you can just turn off the mind and go. But I think most people, I found that when they come to us after their initial consultation on a DWI, almost every one of them walks out feeling a little bit more at ease. In many cases, a lot more at ease.
I was going to say.
But even for the extreme worrier, I think, and they generally and routinely tell me, or when I meet with them, is I feel a lot better. You feel like you're in command of the situation, and that's a sense of relief on us. That's what we want to do. We want to provide a little relief for them in this, even though we have the journey ahead, and we got court dates and things like that. But it always feels good when you can take a little bit of that off their plate.
Absolutely.
They walk out and they say, I feel so much better, because when they initially get that DWI, until they come to our office, it's usually the next day, 2 days later. It's usually pretty quick. They haven't slept, they haven't ate.
They hopped on Google, they've read all the worst things you can possibly see.
Sure.
So it's nice when they're able to come to us. We walk them through the entire, we don't have the evidence. We don't have the police reports at this point, but we lay out the process for them. We let them know what this looks like, that this isn't, end of the world. You're getting fired tomorrow. They can walk out with a sense of relief knowing, okay, I've hired Steve, or I hired Chris, or I hired Matt. I feel better now, knowing that they're in my corner, they're fighting for me, and they're going to let me know each step of the way what needs to be done.
And something I think makes us unique is, you never get stonewalled by a receptionist or a paralegal at our office. Most of our clients have our personal cell phone numbers, so that's a big thing. We try to really personalize our representation as much as possible. The worst thing for me, or one of the worst things in practicing law, is when the client calls you and they're like, I haven't slept in 3 days. It's just been, they're like, I don't want to bother you, and then you answer their questions and they're like, oh, and it's like, I wish you would have called me 3 days ago, a 15-minute conversation.
Sure.
And now you feel light years better.
Yeah.
So, but I didn't know you had these concerns or worries. So, but I always tell clients, look, you're not paying me by the hour. Criminal defense industry standard is flat fees. You're not bothering me. Don't have sleepless nights. If I can, call me, please.
This is nice to feel that you can go to professionals like you guys and feel like you're approachable.
And accessible. That's huge. That's huge, because
huge.
I think that's what I believe separates our firm, and what we try to make is the hallmark. Is, as he said, Chris said, they do have our cell phones. Right. Everybody gets a call back that same day.
That's awesome.
Outside of very few circumstances, I'm in trial or one of us are in trial. But even then, we have staff that's what they do as well, paralegals that know the law almost as much as an attorney, that can help answer some of these just questions, And so accessibility is huge.
And case management software where we're putting in updates all the time to where if they call the office, you know, if we're not available, which is rare, like Steve said, I mean, I can tell you, you know, we're on our phones on vacations and, you know, barring, like he said, being in trial or deposition or something, you know, we're reachable. But again, our case management software, where we're notating updates in the case, it's very easy for, you know, one of our support staff to take a call and say, oh, this is the last note in the file, or anyway, just an example.
It's nice to be proud of that. I mean, it's an attribute that I think you are on a different scale from the profession that you're in for what you offer.
We like to think, you know,
Yeah.
like I said, the number one complaint, what did you hear across the board, whether it's in Missouri, whether it's any other state in the country, it's, I can't get in hold of my lawyer. I don't know what's going on with my case. We, again, the hallmark of what we do at Combs Waterkotte is communication and accessibility. Is any update we get, I always tell clients this, any update we get, you're going to know that within 24 hours. You're not going to, and there's of course periods of time where, you know, it may be weeks, even months that things aren't happening. We're waiting on things from the prosecutors, but you're always going to be updated when we have an update. You're never going to be in the dark in terms of, I don't know when my court date is. I don't know what's going on with my case. You'll know, hey, there's not going to be an update for a month because we're waiting on police reports, you know, things like that. So that's what we try to make, and it is the number one thing that priority in our firm, and what we try to make a hallmark of our firm is that we separate ourselves by the accessibility and the communication with clients.
And if we can alleviate stress and anxiety and sleepless nights by giving up some of our time and knowledge, you know, and I'm talking about 15-minute phone calls, sometimes a half hour, but I mean, that's a big deal, you know. I mean, you just change someone's complete headspace, you know.
Anxiety,
so,
you know, it's so overwhelming.
Of course.
For the anxiety that you feel. And I think that our conversation, if whoever watches this podcast, which by record from the last podcast we did, it's going to be a lot of people. But
we hope.
The point that we're making, I think, by having this conversation is to give some comfort. Like there's opportunities out there for you, but pick the right person, and don't be afraid in a situation and bullied by a police officer to do things that you don't have to do because you have rights.
Absolutely.
And then don't run and let some guy or gal that's maybe had a case or two pack your parachute.
That's right.
Because that's just a terrible idea. So we have the quality, we have the humility, you have the availability, and you have the aptitude.
And you just have to worry about another thing is the red flags of, you know, just the cheaper lawyers like Steve say that, you know, they may just scan through an alcohol influence report, take that plea deal, and that's it, you know, and, you know, but that's what you get for $500,000, you know, I mean, it's just, you know, I mean, it's, again, but yeah.
Makes a difference. So a part of things to expect, so let's say we get through, we made it, called you, you know, things worked out. So how does probation work? And, you know, if losing the license, when can you get it back, or how long does that often, you know, what happens in the process and outside of the process that pushes you into a position where you're encumbered, either for work or for driving or with probation?
I'll handle the probation question first. On a probation can vary. Typical probation length on a misdemeanor case, whether it's DWI or anything, is typically 2 years, and that's the max they can do on a misdemeanor. So we're speaking about DWI, you're looking at a 2-year period of probation. And here's the reality of probation. You know, most folks, it's scary. You think, I'm going to be on the side of the highway picking trash up, and I got to call my PO to drive to Illinois for an appointment. Not the case on a misdemeanor probation. Probation on a misdemeanor is more or less the probation agency overseeing the completion of these classes, community service. A court can't do that, right? A court can't function to oversee the 10,000 people. They just don't have the resources, so it's farmed out to a probation agency.
And let me piggyback just for one moment, because I think this is so important and sets us apart. We try to give our clients, if these classes and things like this are necessary, every opportunity to get them done beforehand, so we can get like limited probation, or, then your only obligation on probation is just stay out of trouble. You don't have to do these classes because you've done everything up front.
Oh, nice.
And it shows you were proactive and took it serious. It can help with your case too, but go ahead.
Yeah, so it's overseeing the conditions of probation, or your completion of classes. And then the other part, the most important part perhaps, is don't get in trouble, because that's how you can ruin our work. And you'll
Sure.
frequently hear judges say that after we've worked out a favorable plea deal on a first offense DWI is, okay, now the burden kind of is on your shoulders. You have a period of 2 years. Don't get in trouble, because almost always we're able on a first offense DWI avoid a conviction from being on their record, avoid points from being on their driving record. But again, the burden then shifts to the client. They walk out of a courtroom, it's on them. We provide them all the information. We get them squared away with the probation, the classes. We say, now it's on you. You stay out of trouble for 2 years. We're good. This is not going on your driving record. You're not incurring points. You don't have a conviction on your record. And so they know when they leave, it's then on them. And so that's another a component of the probation function is, if they were to get in trouble, whether you could be, a St. Louis case and you're in Nebraska or Oklahoma or Lake of the Ozarks, you get police contact and arrest, it's going to be flagged to the probation agency. The probation agency then reports it back to the court and says, hey, Joe Smith, he got arrested out in Kansas City. Then he'll be summoned back in court on the original case that we had or we handled for him.
And so the way that works is, if you're on probation and you do pick up a new arrest, then like Steve said, not only do you ruin, all our good work, we go right back to the sentencing phase. So what happens is the court, meaning the judge or the prosecutor, can file a motion to revoke your probation. We go right back to the drawing board. I mean, we can't relitigate the case. But as far as, we have to go back to this, right back to square one on sentencing.
It reopened sentencing.
Yes,
So now the judge you're back and being resentenced. And depending on what the nature of the arrest, or if that were the case, if it were similar offense, DWI, which we've had many clients on probation for DWI get a new DWI, that's a whole can of worms to then navigate. But so stay out of trouble, complete your classes. It's as simple as that. And you won't have any issues with the probation folks. On a misdemeanor probation, you're not calling and saying, hey, I'm going to Cancun next week, or I'm going to...
You're not taking drug tests.
Yeah, you're not doing any of that.
I mean, it's not the Missouri Board of Probation and Parole. It's, it's...
Felony probation is a little different, but for kind of a first, second offense, misdemeanor probation, that's kind of the function of probation. And again, it's complete your classes or your requirements, stay out of trouble, and you're not going to have any issues.
That's awesome. It's good to know that, that there is life beyond it. I think it all kind of wraps into the fear aspect, the incident itself. Soon as you feel like you're swallowed in it, you start doing exactly what the police officer tells you to do. You'll take anybody that'll answer your phone call, or a friend of a in-law, just because you're so scared. You're not making rational decisions. So I think a takeaway from this entire conversation is that you can take comfort in the rationale that it's going to be okay. You're going to get back to work. Probation will end. Do good, do well. Don't make the same mistake twice, and follow what we just talked about, which is don't do what they expect you to do when you're pulled over, which is prove yourself at fault.
You never win.
You're never going to win.
No.
If they suspect you and they're going to push to submission of that, and that's their goal as they pull you over. And so, the best takeaway that I've got from this, which is every time I talk to you guys, I walk out, I'm like, man, that feels pretty good. I know more about what to expect. I know
Your rights.
like I feel better about my rights, because you don't know, where you land in that rights world when you have a police officer standing before you. You just take for granted they're going to tell you what your rights are, and you just do what they say. And that's a very difficult position to be in any sense.
Sorry to overtalk you, but again, just stay off the internet. It's like having a mysterious ache in your side, and for a few days, and you hop on WebMD, and next thing you think you're dying.
Right.
So,
right.
I've got a lot of people. I can go up to prison for 2 years or a year, or and I'm looking at thousands of dollars. And, pick up the phone, call us.
Right.
20-minute phone call is gonna alleviate, and give you the correct answers.
That's awesome. I mean, it's good. It's just good to have you guys here. It really is. I mean, it's really nice to be able to give this kind of information out to the public, so people can feel a little more comfortable, because mistakes happen. People make mistakes. And it doesn't mean they did it on purpose. It doesn't mean that they were spitefully trying to break the law. It's not the case. You make mistakes. And it's nice to have a place to go when you make a mistake, that someone will help you with how the law wants to press that mistake into your future. And that's what you guys, I feel like that's what you do, is that you relieve that pressure of what they're pressing and affecting your future. We so appreciate this conversation. I really enjoy it. Every time I enjoy it, and every time I walk away learning something new about being in this precarious position, being pulled over, and and who knows what might happen. And I feel like I feel like there's a figment of safety knowing that I could just call you. And they say, call your attorney. I said, well, I'm going to put your numbers in my phone. That's the first thing I'll do. It's like, make this phone call, because I want to feel, I've always wanted to feel like I was safe. That in any entanglement with the law is as a, combating against where they want you to be submissive to. You combat against that, and it's terrifying. And I don't know the law. And it's just great to be in a situation where, we sit down together, and I feel like you guys not only know the law, that you care about the client as well. So we're going to do some rapid fire.
Sure.
And this is just real quick, sort of maybe 1, 2, 3 sentence answers. And I'm just going to go through a list, and we may have already touched on it.
Sure.
But the podcast is more entertaining, more fun, good to listen to. But I think what we'll get into here is very specific.
Sure.
All right. So we answered this question already before, but we can be concise. The question was, what is a DUI versus a DWI?
They're used interchangeably in Missouri, unless it is by drug intoxication, but there's really no reason to focus on DWI, DUI. Mechanically they function the same way.
All right, great. What is the legal blood alcohol concentration, the BAC limit?
0.08 in Missouri is the per se presumptive limit of intoxication in Missouri.
And of course that changes for minors and CDL holders.
And how does that differ?
So for CDL holders, I believe it is a 0.02. They are held to a higher standard. And minors, it can be abuse and lose, or a 0.02 for minors, 0.04 for CDL holders. It's all very case specific, but it's just important to note that it is 0.08 for your regular drivers, and then for minors under 21, it is a different standard, and same with CDL holders.
Excellent. What are Miranda rights, and how do they relate to a suspected DUI?
When a cop is asking questions after you're in custody or under arrest, they have to Mirandize you if they're asking guilt-seeking questions or eliciting incriminating statements from you. They have to Mirandize you at that point, which we all know what that is. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say and do can be used against you in the court of law.
But that's post-arrest, which is important. Because a lot
So
of
you
people
have to be
say,
arrested before they Mirandize you.
yes, because otherwise they're just asking, they're asking generalized questions. They have a lot of people say, well, I was never Mirandized. Well, typically you're not Mirandized, like Steve said, until they're asking guilt-seeking questions, and you're in an interview room, audio, video, where they plan to use that against you.
Excellent. Can you refuse all field sobriety testing?
Yes, you're under no obligation or you're not compelled to do that. You always have the ability to say no.
And do you recommend one or the other?
I would recommend, particularly, the only way I would say to submit to a breathalyzer is if you have had zero to drink. You know that you can pass it. If you've had anything, so much as a half a beer, refuse the breathalyzer, refuse standardized field sobriety test. Generally speaking, it would be my answer.
What are the signs that law enforcement looks for if they suspect you as with a DUI?
There's 3 phases to a DWI investigation. It's the vehicle in motion, the officer observing your driving, what signs, swerving, failing to stay in your single lane is the most typical. Mm-hmm. Personal contact with the driver, that is just where are you coming from, him or her, the officer asking for license and registration. They're gonna be observing all that. So that's in the personal contact phase. And then the last phase is the testing phase, which is the standardized field sobriety test. Typically, the 3 that are given: one leg, the walk and turn, one leg stand, and the horizontal gaze nystagmus test, and then the portable breath test.